Welcome to Inside Sports Talk with your host, Joanna Roselli. I am joined here today with my co-host, Ed Cole, and with TV voice of the Phoenix Suns and National Cowboys or Dallas Cowboys National Radio play-by-play, Kevin Ray. How are you guys?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. Always a pleasure and delighted. Can't wait to talk some sports and football that has happened over the weekend, and it's going on now actually too with the World Series. Just can't wait to get into it.
Joanna, how are you? Good evening.
I am doing great. And happy to have Kevin on. Happy to have you on and be back with another week and another show.
So what an honor and privilege to have K-Ray on, right?
Yes. Definitely is.
Oh, I always enjoy joining the crew here.
Well, thank you. So I cannot wait and ask and get into it with the NFL. We had Monday Night Football yesterday, which for some was very exciting to watch, but for some others, it was pretty grueling to watch. And for you, as you know, right before we came on, we were just talking about it. I was watching the game and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, you as the play-by-play for the Dallas Cowboys, I was like, oh my goodness, how is Kevin doing this? And it was good to watch as a Cardinals fan, but not so great for Cowboys.
Yeah, it was a rough night in Big D. And that's really been the story, you know, all season long with this team. Even though they've got 2 wins, they were very fortunate to have gotten the one against Atlanta. They got a couple of lucky breaks. But last night, you know, the talk in Dallas today, obviously, is surely that has to be the low point of the season. And one would think, based on the way they played, the statistics, and taking nothing away from the Cardinals, because they are a good team. They're a good, exciting, fun team to watch. But the Cowboys, you know, gave them, I mean, you would have thought that, you know, last night was Christmas, because there were one gift after another put under the Cardinals tree. And they were happy to open them all up.
Yeah, Kevin, 4 turnovers, 24 points the Cardinals got off of those. That's one of the Achilles heels for the Dallas Cowboys. Outside of their defense, the fact that they're a minus 12 on the turnover ratio this year, worst by any team in the National Football League. They've given up 84 points off of those turnovers. But for them to give up 24 points of the 38 points the Cardinals scored last night on Monday Night Football, that's just an embarrassment. That's just something that the Cowboys cannot have happen. But it's been happening at a prolific rate for this team this year.
Yeah, it is. And it's, you know, it's one of those things, turnovers as a coach, and Mike McCarthy has said this last week and again, you know, last night and today. Clearly there are teaching moments throughout each practice about ball security, and it has been stressed even more so over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So it's not as though the coaches aren't preaching ball security. And at some point, it just, you know, it's on the players. I mean, a coach can only do so much. A coach can't go out there and make sure you're holding onto the football. Ezekiel Elliott is a veteran running back, and it has really become a problem for Zeke. And you'll hear players and even coaches talk about when it happens, you know, multiple times in multiple weeks, then it starts getting in your head. And then you start thinking about it versus playing. And there's just, you know, it becomes a snowball effect. But that being said, you're a professional who's being paid a king's ransom. Your job is to run the football and hold on to the football. And he hasn't done either very well so far this season. And, you know, Zeke, you know, he took ownership of it and said, this one's on me. But the bottom line is that's 3 multi-fumble games for the Cowboys in consecutive possessions. No other team has won this season. So to your point, Ed, I mean, they're setting all kinds of records, and it's not ones that you want to be associated with.
Yeah, it's not looking good for the Cowboys, unfortunately. Of course, last week we were a witness to Dak Prescott and his injury. Now, this game last night with the Cardinals, well, with Zeke, like you mentioned, 2 fumbles, back-to-back drives, 49 yards on 12 carries. And he took all the blame for that Cowboys loss as well. So I can only imagine not only the team, but even on him, how that's, weighing on him. And how do the Cowboys, as an organization, not only the players, but as an organization, look forward into the season with losing Dak and then coming, back off of another loss?
Well, the good news is they play in the worst division in the NFL. That is the NFC East, or as some have taken to calling it, the NFC least. They still have, 2 games against Philadelphia, 2 games against Washington, and 1 more game against New York, who they've already beaten this season. So with all that being said, if they were to go out and win those 5 remaining games, they would be a division winner, and they could lose every other game and slip into the playoffs as a division winner at 7-9. And keep in mind, there is an additional playoff spot available this season. But, it's easy to sit here and look at the window dressing of the NFC East, but this team has some major flaws and issues that has to be dealt with. And unfortunately, it's not going to get any easier. In fact, about 20 minutes ago, before I came on with you guys, it was confirmed that Brandon Knight, who was the backup starting left tackle for 7-time Pro Bowl left tackle Tyron Smith, who's lost for the season, Brandon Knight is down with a knee injury. So he's going to be lost for 2, possibly 3 weeks. So he was a second-year undrafted free agent starting at left tackle, your most important tackle position in the NFL. So he's lost. And right now, the Cowboys are looking at their practice squad, and they might be at the nearby Home Depot looking for a guy to sign to be their offensive tackle for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Injuries have hit this team extremely hard. They do have a few players coming back. Chibodi Awuzie will help in the secondary. He's expected to be back this week. Sean Lee, we also anticipate returning. And then Randy Gregory, who essentially hasn't played for a season and a half, he was reinstated more than a month ago. He has gone through the protocol, sat out the 6 games after the suspension. So he was activated today. So he will help with that defense as well. But it's more than 1 or 2 people. It's a combination of the scheme and the personnel. Their free agents that they signed in the offseason have not even come close to living up to expectations. I mean, it is truly like a grocery list, and it's not a short one.
That's what I was going to ask you, Kevin. I am baffled as to why the Cowboys are giving up 36.3 points per game. And the talent, you look at, they've got DeMarcus Lawrence, Everson Griffin, Leighton Vander Esch came back last night. You've got so much talent on that defense, but why are they giving up that many points? Why is Mike Nolan's defense so bad?
Well, that's a good question. And look, there were more than a few people whose eyebrows were raised when Mike Nolan was hired as the defensive coordinator. And look, I think the general sentiment is that it was a favor from Mike McCarthy to Nolan, who Nolan had hired McCarthy when McCarthy was an assistant on Nolan's staff way back in the day in San Francisco. That didn't work out very well. And in each of his stops as a DC did not work out very well. And, I will tell you that I personally was a little puzzled by that selection as your defensive coordinator. I understood the entire previous coaching staff was going to be flushed, but I felt there were other better candidates. And part of the issue, to really address your question, Ed, is you've got Mike Nolan. He is a 3-4 guy. And you look at the personnel that they have, they're all players who have performed at their highest level in a 4-3 scheme. And he's tried to kind of meld the two together, and it just hasn't worked. And then the secondary, it's been a combination of injuries, young players, and then players just not performing. Darryl Worley, an offseason free agent pickup from Oakland, he was burned a couple of times last night. He was burned deep on the route by Christian Kirk. So it is guys who were expected to play at a much higher level that are not coming close. Dontari Poe on the defensive line. He's been a huge disappointment for the organization and the fans as well, because he has just not made any kind of a presence in the tackle position.
That's a lot that's happening for the
But
Cowboys.
other than that, everything's great.
Yes, definitely. And I want to go ahead and go into a little bit more football and go a little away from the Cowboys. So I want to get your take. And then talk a little bit further into some good, some bad, and some ugly in football this last weekend.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and start with the good. What did you see as good coming off this last weekend?
I think the good was, if you're a Steeler fan, you've got to be really excited about team and the potential to maybe represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. And I know that Chiefs fans will go, whoa, wait a minute. But I can see the Steelers getting to the AFC Championship against this Kansas City team. Their defense is as nasty as I've seen a Steelers defense in at least a decade. And you listen to some of the comments from former Steeler greats who have played on some of those previous teams, and it even has their attention. You've got a healthy Ben Roethlisberger. They've got some weapons both in the ground attack and in the passing attack. So it's a Steelers team that looks really good. They're healthy and looks like they're going to be a handful for people. I thought it was a nice bounce back game. I didn't get to watch all of it. I was catching kind of bits and pieces of it last night as we prepared for our game. But I thought it was a good, solid bounce back win for the defending champs against Buffalo in some really ugly conditions. Buffalo completely, set their defense up to make Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs offense, try to be patient. And they weren't going to give up those explosive plays. And so Kansas City has a huge rushing day in some really poor conditions. So I thought that was very good. Outside of that, there weren't any other. Well, let me take that back. So Tennessee, I think, is another team that is going to be really interesting to watch. I mean, for them to come back and beat the Texans, and I'm sure you guys have talked about it, but the move by Vrabel to essentially get the penalty intentionally in order to stop the clock, and those extra 40 seconds by stopping the clock allowed him and his team to go down the field and score the game-tying touchdown and point after with, I think it was 4 or 6 seconds left. So Tennessee was another game that I thought was really good.
Joe, two goods for me were two teams that actually got their first wins of the season. The Atlanta Falcons going to Minnesota, getting that victory, and the New York Giants, who you saw last week, Kevin, down at AT&T Stadium. They got their first victory over Washington. The Giants are really not a bad football team. You know that, Kevin. You saw them last week. I mean, they gave the Cowboys all they wanted down in Arlington. The Giants are really not a bad team. I like what Joe Judge is doing with the Giants.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate. I mean, he's missing two of his most explosive offensive weapons in Saquon Barkley and Sterling Shepard. And, you looked at the Giants' win yesterday. They were not, and it really speaks to just how poor this Cowboys defense is playing because they struggled to get 20 points yesterday against Washington. But yeah, I thought it was nice for them to get the win. They've played hard under Joe Judge, which I think has been a departure from what we saw the last couple of seasons with New York.
For me, my good was, of course, I have to go with the Cardinals. They did start off great this season with 2 wins, and then they go and what we know and expect at one point having them lose, and then having them see what they were able to do and come back and have that blowout win against the Cowboys. But that was phenomenal. They did what they needed to do in order to go ahead and obtain that win, be able to go into next week, which they're going to be facing Seattle Seahawks, which is a dominating team and one of the toughest teams in the NFL and in the division. Because right now they need to be getting those wins and they cannot not afford to lose, especially if they're wanting to go to the playoffs. And we know that's always a constant battle with the Arizona Cardinals.
Kevin, before we go to the bad, what did you see last night from the Cardinals that impressed you, that you took away from last night? And you're like, man, I like what I saw in this Cardinals team. I like A, B, and C. Or what did you like that you were like, oh my gosh, I like what I see from this Cardinals team?
Well, I knew before